I turned pale when I saw another man kiss my wife at the company's couples dinner, so I went up to them and said, "I hope you're sure about the choice you're making, because I'm going to move on with my life." She was speechless when she saw me, as if the world had stopped when she realized that her secret, until then kept under layers of fake smiles and rehearsed touches, had been ripped from the darkness in front of all those faces that pretended to be friendly but now stared at her in shock, in complicit silence or in whispers eager for scandal. I felt my heart beat so hard that I thought it would explode inside my chest, my hands were shaking and my mind screamed as if each beat echoed the word betrayal, 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 while my gaze burned into hers, which she looked away, trying to hide the shame that not even she knew how to carry at that moment when everything broke into irreparable pieces. The glasses clinked in a sound so high-pitched that it sounded like an alarm announcing the end of what had once been our story and of what I thought was true love. At that moment, the voices around me became distant, as if everyone was submerged in a bubble of water and I was the only one breathing the heavy air of humiliation and despair. I remember that I turned my back with my head held high but with my chest torn apart, and with each step the memory of each promise she made echoed in me, saying, "I will never betray you, I will never leave you, I will always love you," as if each of these phrases were now a blade cutting my flesh in silence. I arrived home as if carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I sat on the couch and took a deep breath, but the air seemed too dense to enter my lungs. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, remembering every detail of our wedding, the trips, the laughter at breakfast, the kisses before bed, how I hugged her on stormy days saying that nothing could separate us. But there, on that couch, I realized that the words had turned to dust, that the trust had broken like shattered glass on the cold floor of reality, and that I was alone in the middle of a house full of memories of a love that never really existed, or at least that existed only for me. And it was in that suffocating silence that I decided that there would be no more room for her in my life. I decided that I would move on even if my bones hurt with every movement away from her, even if my soul screamed for answers that would never come. Days later, there was a knock on the door as if it were dawn inside me, and there she was, with teary eyes, smeared makeup and shaking hands like someone who finally understands the gravity of the mistake she made. I heard her voice crack as she said, "I don't know what came over me, I was weak, I made a mistake, but I love you, forgive me, it wasn't supposed to be like this." Tears ran down her face as if each drop was trying to wash away the dirt of betrayal that still dripped from her soul. But as she spoke, I realized that those words no longer had a place inside me, that the pain had turned love into a bitter memory, that the sound of her voice no longer sounded like honey, but like acid corroding the dignity I fought to maintain amidst the chaos. I took a deep breath and calmly said, "I'm willing to move on. And without you," the words came out firm like a hammer blow, sealing the fate of what I once thought would be eternal. And it was there, in the silence that followed, that I realized that my greatest victory would not be having her back, but rather finding myself again. Even amidst the shards that remained. I remember every second of that night as if it were a tattoo branded into my mind, the lights of the restaurant reflecting in her eyes, the sound of laughter that now sounded like mockery, the looks of my colleagues that alternated between pity and judgment, the feeling of being naked in the middle of a crowd, exposed in my vulnerability, in my blind faith in someone who didn't know how to value the immensity of the love I gave on a silver platter. I found myself thinking about how many times she hugged me while keeping secrets, how many times she said "I love you" before leaving to meet him, how many times she smiled knowing that she was building a lie that would become my sentence. And the more I remembered, the more I felt the fire of contempt burning inside, not only for her, but for myself, for having been so blind, so innocent, so in love that I didn't see the cracks that were growing like cracks in a dam about to collapse. The following nights were long as eternal winters. The pillow became my confidant, the ceiling my silent judge, and each message from her on my cell phone sounded like an insult to my intelligence, promising changes, begging for second chances that I knew would lead nowhere, because whoever cheats once reveals who they really are, and nothing that was said could erase the bitter taste of the kiss she gave another man in front of everyone, as if my love were disposable like a used napkin thrown in the trash. Each time I read "I'm so sorry, forgive me, I promise I'll change," I felt my heart shrink a little more until it became a cold stone, impenetrable to any feeling that came from her, because love, once broken, cannot be put back together with words. Every morning, I got out of bed like someone wearing chains, but as the days went by, I felt something new being born within me, a strength that I didn't know existed, the strength of someone who decides that they will no longer be a victim, that they will no longer cry for someone who doesn't deserve it, that they will no longer beg for affection from someone who betrayed the most precious trust that exists between two people. I started to take up my hobbies again, to go out with friends who had drifted away because I was so absorbed in a relationship that was no longer mine. I started to smile for real, even if shyly, and each smile was like a ray of sunshine piercing the dense storm that hung over my life. Each laugh was like a breath of freedom. Each new day was a victory over the pain that one day I thought would kill me. It was then that, on a cold night, during a solitary walk through the city, I met eyes with someone who didn't look away, who smiled sincerely, who saw beyond my tired expression, and there, in that brief moment, I understood that love doesn't die, it just frees itself from those who don't know how to take care of it, and that the heart, no matter how torn apart it is, always finds a way to beat stronger again when it finds someone who makes every beat worthwhile, and it was at that moment that I realized that the betrayal that almost destroyed me actually took me to where I needed to be to rediscover myself, to love myself again, to understand that self-love is the first love that should never be betrayed, that my life didn't need to end because someone decided to throw away the trust one gave as a gift. And now, as I revisit each memory, each tear, each heavy sigh, I wonder what it would have been like if I hadn't arrived early at that dinner, if I hadn't seen with my own eyes the scene that changed everything, if I had believed the soft lies she would tell me to cover up what happened, would we still be together? Would I continue living in a comforting illusion, while she repeated the same mistake or even something worse? Was it cruel fate or a bitter gift that put me at exactly the right time to see the truth stripped of disguises? Because deep down, what consumes me the most is knowing that, even after everything, part of me still wanted to believe that it was possible to start over, that a sincere apology could erase the betrayal, that the love I once felt could still be resurrected, but can trust ever be reborn after being so brutally murdered. Welcome to the channel. Here, we never support any type of betrayal. All the stories you hear are fictional and exist to show how infidelity destroys lives, tears hearts apart and leaves scars that never fade. Get ready, because what you are about to hear is a shocking story. Good story. Jonathan was a man who everyone described as trustworthy, dedicated and as present as the sunrise. From a very young age, he had a calm, almost naive glow in his eyes that won over those around him. He came from a simple family, but one that had taught him non-negotiable values, respect, honesty, and the value of building a life together based on trust. Ever since he met Emma, all of this became even more important to him, because he saw in her not only the woman of his dreams, but also the partner he wanted to have by his side to face every storm and celebrate every achievement. Emma, in turn, was known for her captivating friendliness, her natural elegance and the way she could transform any room into a lighter place just by her presence. It was impossible to walk past her without noticing her open smile and her soft, almost musical laugh. Together, they formed a couple that many described as perfect, the kind that inspires sighs from those who believe that true love exists and that two people can complete each other in such a harmonious way that they seem tailor-made for each other. They lived in a white-fronted house with dark wooden windows, decorated with pots of hydrangeas that Emma made a point of personally caring for, because she said that plants were a reflection of the care one takes for one's own life. The house was in a neighborhood where children still played on the sidewalks and neighbors knew each other by name, a place that conveyed a sense of security and belonging. Inside, each room had a story. The worn-out sofa in the living room still held memories of the series marathons they watched on the weekends. The kitchen, with its blue tiles, was the scene of the couple's most important conversations, while they cut vegetables or drank coffee in silence, sharing a complicity that needed no words to exist. The couple's bedroom, with white curtains gently swaying in the wind that came in from the balcony, was the refuge where they allowed themselves to be vulnerable, to laugh at silly things and cry together when something hurt too deeply. Jonathan always made a point of waking up early to make Emma's coffee, even on days with a busy schedule. He believed that small gestures kept love alive. He liked to watch the way she combed her hair, the way she frowned when she was concentrating on something, the way she devoted herself completely to the things she did. He was in love with her determination, her intelligence, and the way she managed to balance her career in the communications sector with her personal life. even though, at times, work took up more of her time than she would have liked. Emma was an ambitious, dreamy woman who wanted to make her mark on the world and, often, came home exhausted, but she still found the strength to smile when she saw Jonathan, and that smile, for him, was more invigorating than any good night's sleep. Friday nights were special for the two of them. It was traditional to have dinner together, without rushing, talking about the week, about plans for the future or just musing about places they would like to visit. Jonathan, as pragmatic as he was, found himself dreaming big when he was with her, and Emma loved to provoke those dreams, encouraging him to believe that nothing was impossible for them as long as they were together. On their wedding anniversaries, they exchanged handwritten letters, as if each year were a new chapter that deserved to be recorded in words, and they kept these letters in a wooden box that smelled of cedar, hidden in the back of the bedroom closet. The couple's closest friends felt healthy envy of the relationship they had built. During dinners they organized at home, it was common to see the knowing looks exchanged between them, the inside jokes that only made sense to those who shared true intimacy, the subtle touches in the midst of lively conversations that said everything without needing to be heard. This atmosphere of genuine connection made them admired and, in many cases, taken as an example of a mature and balanced relationship that survives the pressures of modern life without losing the romance of the early days. Emma, despite all the love she received from Jonathan, often felt overwhelmed. Her work routine was stressful, full of tight deadlines and endless meetings that left little space for herself. There were nights when she would come home so tired that she would just lie down on the couch, still dressed in her office clothes, and fall asleep there, with no energy for anything else. On those occasions, Jonathan would cover her with a blanket, turn off the lights, and sit next to her in silence, as if keeping vigil to protect the sleep of the one he loves. Although the demands of Emma's career caused some disagreements, they always made an effort to reconnect on the weekends, when they would escape for short hikes in the park or to cozy cafes where they could forget about the clock and simply be there for each other. Their relationship was marked by gestures that went beyond words. On days when Emma felt insecure, Jonathan would remind her how admirable she was, praising not only her beauty, but especially her courage and determination. When Jonathan faced problems at work or doubts about his career choices, it was Emma who encouraged him to persist, who believed in him so strongly that she ended up making him believe in himself. These moments formed the solid foundation on which they built years of living together, like bricks laid with patience, respect and, above all, love. Their family was also proud of the bond they had cultivated. Jonathan's parents saw Emma as a daughter, and Sunday lunches were punctuated by long conversations, laughter and jokes that recalled the light-heartedness of childhood. Emma's parents admired Jonathan's serenity, a person who does not run away from problems, but faces them calmly, and felt at ease knowing that their daughter was in good hands. At family gatherings, the two were inseparable partners, sharing tasks, looking at each other as if silently confirming that everything was fine, that their partnership was still going strong. In their neighborhood, they were known as the couple who always helped each other out. When someone needed something, whether it was a package they received while their neighbor was away or help fixing something around the house, they were always there to help. At neighborhood events, they organized June festivals, Christmas decorations, and charity bazaars, creating a network of support and friendship that reinforced the sense of belonging they cherished so much. These strong bonds gave the couple the impression that nothing could shake what they had built together, because they believed that their love was stormproof. The days passed at a pace that mixed the typical rush of adult life with the calm of cozy moments, and even though some routines became repetitive, there was always something that kept the flame of their relationship alive. Jonathan liked to surprise Emma with little notes scattered around the house, and Emma, in turn, knew exactly how to cheer him up when she noticed he was down. She would prepare his favorite dish, play the song that they had chosen as the soundtrack of their relationship and invite him to dance in the living room, reminding him that life is made up of simple moments that become unforgettable. In the last few months, though, something had felt different. Although they continued to follow the same traditions, there were small signs that, in isolation, might have gone unnoticed, but that, taken together, began to paint a picture of subtle distance. Emma sometimes seemed lost, as if she were far away even when she was physically present, and Jonathan, though he tried to remain optimistic, felt that there was something he could not quite grasp about her. She would smile, but the smile would not reach her eyes. He would say "I love you" and, instead of hearing her answer immediately, he would see a brief silence before receiving the words back. These fissures, so thin and imperceptible at first, began to grow like cracks beneath the surface of a frozen lake, threatening to shatter the harmony they had always believed to be unshakable. Even so, they both clung to the hope that it was just a difficult phase, the result of stress and external pressures. They tried to rekindle the flame with special dinners, short weekend trips, and lazy afternoons at home together. When night fell, Jonathan remembered every detail that made him love her, the sound of her laughter echoing through the house, the way she ran her hand through her hair before going to sleep, the warmth of her embrace that made everything seem right, even when the world outside was wrong. Emma, in turn, looked at Jonathan while he slept, noticed his serene face, the tranquility of someone who trusts completely, and felt the weight of something that she couldn't define, but that was beginning to bother her like a pebble in her shoe. The atmosphere between them oscillated between moments of pure harmony and others of uncomfortable silence, as if they were both walking a tightrope, not knowing whether the next step would bring them closer together or tear them apart for good. Still, there was love, there were memories, there was history, and all of this kept hope alive. The couple continued to seek in each other the safe haven they had always been, even as the tide began to silently move, carrying with it secrets and insecurities that would soon threaten to sink everything they had spent years building. The days stretched out as if time conspired to stretch each second, making each silence between Jonathan and Emma heavier, denser, as if the choked words wanted to explode at any moment. The routine that had once been comforting began to feel like a maze, where both of them got lost in gazes that no longer met. Jonathan would come home from work eager to share something that excited him, but he would find Emma sitting on the couch with her cell phone in her hands, her eyes glued to the screen, disconnected from everything around her. He would smile, ask her how her day was, but he would receive short, cold answers, as if the warmth he loved so much had dissipated without warning. The mornings, which had previously been marked by soft conversations and lingering kisses, began to be invaded by haste and loose, disconnected words that failed to fill the growing void between them. Jonathan tried to ignore the discomfort, he made an effort to keep the atmosphere of complicity alive, but the closer he got, the more he felt Emma moving away, as if an invisible wall was being erected with each attempt to get closer. On Friday nights, their traditions began to become obligations, mechanical meetings that seemed more like performances than genuine moments of affection. Jonathan made reservations for restaurants they had always dreamed of visiting, chose special wines, prepared surprises that would once have made Emma vibrate with joy, but instead of sparkling eyes, he found apathetic expressions, forced laughter that echoed like distant echoes of a past that no longer existed. On one of those nights, Emma arrived for dinner with a different perfume than usual, a more striking aroma that carried something that Jonathan could not define, but that left a bitter taste in his mouth. During dinner, she checked her watch frequently, her cell phone vibrated in her bag more often than usual, and each message seemed to draw small smiles from her that were not directed at Jonathan. He pretended not to notice, but inside he felt his heart shrink, squeezed by a feeling that he still refused to name. Weekends began to be filled with commitments that Emma would make up at the last minute, emergency meetings, get-togethers with friends she had never mentioned before, courses that came up as justifications for spending the entire Saturday away. Jonathan, in his attempt not to seem controlling, accepted each justification with a lump in his throat, wanting to believe every word said, but feeling his instinct screaming that something was wrong. He tried to distract himself by organizing the house, resuming hobbies that had been put aside, but with each message from Emma saying that she would be late or would not be able to return that night, the silence that enveloped him became deafening. The sound of the clock became his constant companion, marking each second of her absence as a reminder that the life they had built was crumbling, inch by inch. One Sunday morning, while tending to the garden that Emma was so proud of, Jonathan found a ticket in her coat pocket for a show that had taken place the night before, in a completely different location than where Emma had said it would be. He felt the ground disappear beneath his feet, his mind spinning as if it were going to collapse right there among the flowers that had once symbolized the care and dedication they had for each other. Instead of confronting her, he kept the ticket, as if he needed concrete proof to confirm what his heart already knew but refused to accept. In the following days, he began to notice every detail, the different smell on her clothes, the sudden change of password on her cell phone, the increasingly irregular schedules. And yet, he forced himself to smile when they were together, to pretend he didn't notice the empty looks, that he didn't notice the way Emma avoided physical contact, as if every touch was an uncomfortable reminder of something she didn't want to face. Their conversations, once spontaneous, became filled with contained tension. Jonathan asked about work and her friends, but Emma's answers came automatically, as if they were rehearsed. When he tried to extend the conversation, she would change the subject or say she was tired, ending the discussions before they even began. The couple's bed had become cold, the nights long and uncomfortable, and excuses to go to bed early or come home late became routine. Jonathan, lying next to Emma, listened to her breathing and wondered if that sound would still bring her peace, or if it would forever be a reminder of what they were losing. The hands that had once intertwined naturally now met only by chance, and even then, they separated quickly, as if the touch burned. The atmosphere at home began to reflect this distance. Objects that symbolized happy times began to seem like mere decorations, memories that hurt more than they brought comfort. The wedding photo album, which had been open on the shelf, was closed and forgotten, as if the memories needed to be buried so that the present would become bearable. Jonathan's clothes began to occupy only half of the closet, the other half seemed empty, not only physically, but symbolically, as if the space intended for complicity was slowly being taken over by Emma's absence. Even her closest friends began to notice something was wrong, commenting on how distant she seemed, how they no longer appeared together as before. It was in the midst of this turmoil that the invitation to the traditional couple's dinner at the company where Emma worked arrived. Jonathan, believing it would be the perfect opportunity to bring them closer together, insisted on accompanying her, even though he noticed her hesitation in accepting. He dedicated himself to every detail, he chose his suit carefully, prepared compliments, planned to recapture the lightness that had always characterized them. When they arrived at the event, everything seemed the same as in previous years: smiles, greetings, soft music, glasses of wine being raised in toasts. Emma, however, was strangely tense, and although she tried hard to maintain her appearance, she avoided eye contact with Jonathan, as if any deeper look could reveal what she was hiding. Dinner was an artificial affair, filled with shallow conversations that barely concealed the growing anguish that was eating away at Jonathan. Every time Emma got up to go to the bathroom or talk to someone, he felt a shiver run down his spine, a feeling of foreboding that became increasingly unbearable. Between one glass of wine and another, he noticed that she was exchanging long glances with a man she had never seen before, a man who seemed to appear out of nowhere, but who, by the intensity of his gaze, had a story that would not fit into a first meeting. Emma's hands trembled slightly every time Jonathan tried to make conversation, and her smile disappeared the moment the mysterious man approached. The climax came when, while everyone was toasting, Jonathan stepped away a little to get another drink from the improvised bar in the room. When he returned, his steps slowed as if the air around him had become heavy, almost solid, because there, a few meters away, he saw Emma leaning against a column, the mysterious man in front of her, their faces so close that the tension between them was impossible to ignore. He stopped, his heart racing, but he forced himself to take a few more steps, and it was then that he saw the kiss happen, a kiss that was not one of farewell or friendship, but of desire, of intimacy, as if at that moment the whole world around them had ceased to exist for them. The noise in the hall seemed to cease, the sound of the music became muffled, and the shattering certainty that everything he believed in had been destroyed echoed inside him like thunder. The seconds dragged on as he took in the scene, the woman he loved, his partner of so many years, exchanging caresses with another man, and there were no more doubts, only the raw, cutting pain of someone who sees their own life collapse before their very eyes. Jonathan took a deep breath, gathering strength he didn't even know he had, and advanced towards the two. The people nearby, noticing the mood, moved away in silence, forming a corridor of surprised and judgmental looks. When Emma saw him, her eyes widened as if a ghost had appeared, the words stuck in her throat and the blush quickly rose to her face. With a firm voice and unwavering gaze, he said to her and to the man who was still holding her hand, "I hope you are sure of the choice you are making, because I am going to move on with my life." He turned around without waiting for an answer, leaving behind not only the elegant ballroom, but also the last ties of a relationship that, at that moment, was coming to an inevitable end. As he walked among the guests in stunned silence, a whirlwind of emotions took over every fiber of his being, because now all that was left was to face the consequences of what had just happened and discover how deep the lies that fueled this betrayal went. The silence that enveloped Jonathan's house that night was so heavy that it seemed to have a shape, filling every corner with a suffocating feeling of abandonment. He remained sitting on the couch, his cell phone in his hands, reading for the 100th time the divorce letter he had left on the office table hours before leaving the dinner that had changed everything. The words were there, cold, direct, and each sentence he had written himself was like a stab that, even though necessary, hurt as if it were tearing out a piece of what he had been by Emma's side. As the clock ticked away the hours that dragged by, his mind wandered, going through every detail that had brought them together, every memory that now seemed so distant and irrelevant. He felt tired, like someone carrying the weight of a lifetime on his shoulders, but there was also a flame that insisted on shining in the depths of his eyes, a flame that told him it was time to start over. It was in this state of mixed torpor and determination that he heard the sound of keys turning in the door and, for a brief moment, his entire body trembled, as he knew that that moment would be the most difficult of all. Emma entered slowly, as if invading a sanctuary where she no longer belonged. Her eyes were swollen, her makeup smeared, and her steps were hesitant, but there was urgency in every movement, as if there was still hope of rebuilding something between them. She saw Jonathan sitting, the letter beside him, and stopped, feeling her legs weaken. With a trembling voice that barely came out of her throat, she murmured, "Please, listen to me, I need to explain what happened, you don't understand, it's not what you think." Jonathan looked up, his gaze firmer than she had ever seen it, and answered in a low voice, but so full of pain and exhaustion that his words seemed to echo off the walls, "Do you really think there is anything that can be said that will change what I saw with my own eyes? Do you think any explanation can erase what you did?" She took a few steps forward, her hands outstretched as if begging for salvation, the words coming out in a rush, "I know I hurt you, that I destroyed you, but you need to know that it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, I still love you, you are everything to me, I was confused, lost, I didn't want it to be like this, please, let me try to fix it." Jonathan stood up slowly, breathing heavily as if each breath was a colossal effort, and looked at Emma with eyes that no longer held love, but rather a cutting serenity, as if the whirlwind of emotions had given way to brutal clarity. With a firm voice, he said, "I don't know at what moment you lost yourself, but I refuse to continue sinking with you. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the conscious choice to destroy everything we built, and the worst part was knowing that while I was fighting for us, you had already given up on me." Tears streamed down Emma's face as she insisted, shaking her head repeatedly as if she wanted to erase reality with denial. "No, no, it's not like that, that's not what happened, I made a mistake, but we can still fight, we still have time, I can't imagine my life without you, you don't understand, I was scared, scared of losing you, scared of not being enough for you anymore, scared of being left behind while you grew up. I never wanted it to come to this, I just wanted to feel alive, wanted. Important, but it was a mistake, a horrible mistake, forgive me, forgive me." Jonathan clenched his fists as he heard each word, because each sentence of hers confirmed that the love he felt had turned into an emotional trap, a vicious cycle that would keep him prisoner if he didn't have the courage to break out. He took a deep breath and, with his voice choked with a mixture of anger and sadness, he said, "Do you know what the worst part of all this is? It wasn't the kiss, it wasn't the look you gave him, it wasn't even the feeling of humiliation in front of everyone. The worst part was realizing that I had been alone for a long time, that while I was holding on to memories of what we were, you had already decided that you needed someone else to feel alive. And the cruelest thing is that you made me believe that everything was okay, that we were still the same." Emma fell to her knees on the carpet, her hands shaking, her breathing uneven, her voice breaking into sobs. "I hate myself for doing this, I hate myself for destroying you. I just wanted you to understand that I was confused, that I never planned any of this, that I love you, I've always loved you." Jonathan bent down to her level, his eyes on hers, and said, "You say you love me, but love doesn't hurt like that, it doesn't betray, it doesn't lie, it doesn't destroy. True love cares, protects, builds, and if you ever loved me, it died when you decided that your desires were more important than our story. Silence fell again, but this time it seemed definitive, heavy as a verdict. Jonathan stood up, walked to the table and picked up a folder he had prepared with organized documents. He handed it to Emma and said, "Here is the proof you will need to understand that this decision is not a threat, nor emotional blackmail, but a path of no return, because from now on, I will move forward." Emma held the folder with trembling hands, opened it and found not only the divorce letter, but photos of her on dates with the man from dinner, records that he himself had gathered in the last few days when he began to suspect. Her gaze, which had previously been filled with despair, now showed panic, as if only then did she understand the scale of what she had done, as if reality was crushing her mercilessly. Her voice came out in an almost inaudible whisper, "How did you manage this? Did you spy on me?" Jonathan kept his gaze calm and answered, "No, I just opened my eyes, I just stopped believing your excuses, I just started to see the truth that you tried so hard to hide." Emma's tears fell incessantly, staining the papers she was holding as if they could dissolve along with the lies she had told, and with each word she tried to stammer, she lost herself in a sea of regret. That was when Jonathan, with the door already open, turned for the last time to face the one who had been the love of his life, and revealed with a cold voice, but filled with a serenity that came from liberation, "You always said that I was predictable, that nothing about me surprised you anymore, but know that while you believed that I was destroyed inside, I met someone again who made me remember who I am, someone who has always been in my life, who showed me that love is not pain, that love does not need to be begged for, that true love makes us want to be better, and it is with her that I will start over." Emma brought her hands to her face, her breathing turning into deep sobs, because now everything made sense. Every time he left without explaining, every moment he seemed distant, every step he took towards rebuilding himself while she sank into regret. The shock went through her body like a lightning bolt, because she realized that she had lost not only the man who loved her, but the chance to be forgiven, to repair the irreparable. He turned around without looking back, closing the door with the certainty of someone leaving behind not only a house, but the chains of a life that no longer fit him. As he walked down the sidewalk lit only by the flickering light of the street lamps, he felt his heart beating steadily, free of a weight he had carried for too long, and somewhere, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new story that he would write with someone who truly knew the value of love. The wind that night seemed to carry the last remaining memories between Jonathan and Emma, spreading broken promises and words that would never be said again across the deserted street. As he walked away from the house that had once been his refuge, he felt the air grow lighter, as if with each step he was leaving behind not only the weight of betrayal, but also the version of himself that accepted crumbs of affection. The streetlights cast long shadows that followed him, and with each block he walked, he felt that the future, once so hazy, began to reveal itself like a horizon that appeared after a storm. It was then that his cell phone vibrated in his pocket, illuminating the face of someone he had not expected to see so soon, Sophie, the childhood friend who had been a constant presence in his life until the last few years, when the rush and total dedication to marriage had distanced him from many people who really mattered. Her message was short, but full of concern and affection. "I heard what happened. If you need to talk, I'm here." Jonathan paused for a moment, reading and rereading those simple words that had hit him harder than any speech. With tears in his eyes, he replied, "Yes, I do. Can you find me?" Sophie didn't hesitate. She sent him the location of a cafe that was open until late, a place they had both frequented when they were young, on lazy afternoons when they would discuss dreams and secrets. Arriving at the cafe was like crossing a portal to a time when everything seemed easier, where fears were fewer and pains were more fleeting. The soft sound of the piano in the background filled the space, and the aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the scent of cinnamon brought a comforting nostalgia, almost like a hug. Sophie was sitting at one of the corner tables, fiddling with her cup nervously as she looked for him. When she saw him, she gave him a sad but sincere smile, which made Jonathan realize how much he missed that warm look. He approached her and, without saying anything, she stood up and wrapped him in a long hug, where words were not necessary. They sat down and, for a few seconds, they just remained in silence, letting each other's presence speak louder than any sentence. Sophie was the first to break the silence, her voice choked and her eyes fixed on his. You didn't deserve this, you never did. You were always the best man I've ever known. It hurts me so much to see you like this. Jonathan took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the smoke rising from the cup in his hands. I thought love was enough, that all I did for her was to keep our relationship strong. But now I see that love alone doesn't sustain anything. Sophie held his hand across the table, her warm fingers contrasting with the coldness she felt in her chest, and said firmly, loving alone is like rowing a leaky boat. You can try as hard as you want, but it will sink if the other person doesn't row with you. Jonathan let out a sad laugh, as if he recognized the harsh but liberating truth in those words. He then opened up, telling her everything that had happened, the months of separation, the subtle lies, the betrayal exposed in front of everyone and, finally, the certainty that he needed to leave to save himself. Sophie listened to each word carefully, without interrupting, only squeezing his hand from time to time, as if restoring strength to someone who is weak. At one point, her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, taking a deep breath before revealing something that had been in her heart for years. I need to confess something to you. I've always loved you, Jonathan. Ever since we were just two dreamy teenagers. But when I saw you so happy with Emma, I decided to walk away, because all I wanted was to see you smiling. But now, seeing you destroyed like this, I realized that maybe, at another time, we could have had a chance. Her words echoed like thunder inside him, making his heart race. He looked at her, surprised, because he had never imagined that Sophie, with whom he had shared so many moments, held such deep feelings. The silence that followed was full of possibilities, but also of respect. They both knew that this was not the time to decide anything, but the simple revelation rekindled a flame of hope in Jonathan. He leaned forward, holding her face gently, looking deeply into her eyes and saying in a low but intense voice, knowing that you've been around all this time, even in silence, makes me feel less alone. I don't know what will happen from now on, but I wanted you to know that, right now, you're the only person who makes sense in my life. Sophie smiled with teary eyes, and they approached until their foreheads touched, sharing the same warm air, their breaths mingling, as if they both sought strength in each other's warmth. When words failed, their eyes spoke, and in that moment there was no longer any need for explanations. The waiter broke the mood by bringing another coffee, and they both laughed, relieved, realizing how that unexpected encounter had transformed the pain into something more bearable. They stayed in the cafe until the early hours, reminiscing about childhood stories, confiding fears they had never shared, discovering spaces in each other that they had never known existed. The connection that had always been there, dormant, began to awaken, and each smile they exchanged brought the feeling that, despite everything, life could still hold encounters that healed deep wounds. As they left the cafe, the early morning enveloped the city in a peaceful silence, interrupted only by the sound of synchronized footsteps on the sidewalk, wet from the light drizzle that was beginning to fall. Sophie offered to give her a ride, but Jonathan refused, saying he needed to walk a little further to gather his thoughts. Before they said goodbye, she hugged him again, for a long time, and whispered in his ear, "Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." He smiled sincerely for the first time in a long time and replied, "Thank you, you have no idea how much this means to me." In the days that followed, Jonathan began to rebuild himself. He organized his things, looked for a new apartment, and with each box he packed, he felt like he was removing another piece of the past that needed to be left behind. When he finally moved in, he chose an airy, bright place with large windows that let the sun in as a symbol of a new beginning. Each room was decorated with care, not to impress anyone, but to reflect the man he wanted to be from then on, free, aware, open to the possibilities that life could still offer. Sophie came by often, helping him choose objects, giving suggestions on colors and paintings, and each visit transformed the space into something more alive, more full of meaning. One afternoon, as they were finishing hanging the last curtains, Sophie struck up a conversation that Jonathan hadn't expected, but needed to happen. In a soft but firm voice, she said, "I know you're still in pieces, and I don't want to rush anything. I just want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. If you need time, space, or just silence, I'll respect that. Jonathan hugged her sideways, feeling the warmth of her body, and replied, I can't thank you enough. You've made me see that love doesn't have to be pain. And even though I'm still confused, I feel at peace for the first time in a long time. However, the past would soon come knocking on the door. On a rainy morning, Emma unexpectedly appeared in front of Jonathan's new apartment, soaking wet, holding the folder of documents he had given her, her hands shaking as if the cold of the rain was just a reflection of the ice that now dominated her soul. Without waiting for an invitation, she began to speak between sobs, I know you've already moved on, that you found someone who values you like I never knew. I just needed to tell you, for the last time, that the greatest punishment I can bear is knowing that I've lost you. That there's nothing I can do to win you back. And I deserve that pain. Jonathan listened to her in silence, his gaze calm but without any trace of pity. When she finished, he took a deep breath and replied calmly, You don't need my permission to feel regret. And I no longer need your love to live. I hope that one day you will find the strength to forgive yourself, but I am no longer part of your story. Emma shook her head, tears mixing with the rain, and as she turned to leave, she seemed to carry on her shoulders the weight of all the mistakes that could never be erased. Closing the door, Jonathan felt as if a cycle had finally ended. He walked to the living room, where Sophie was organizing books on the shelf, and she looked at him with concern. He smiled, a calm and confident smile, and said, It's time to write new chapters. And, if you want, I want you to be with me in every line of this new story. Sophie smiled back, her eyes shining with the certainty of someone who had also waited a long time for this moment, and together, they sat side by side, watching the rain wash the streets outside, as if purifying everything that needed to be left in the past so that, from then on, they could start over without fear. The rain stopped the same night that Emma left Jonathan's new apartment, and in the silence that fell after the door closed, he and Sophie remained sitting side by side, still absorbing the weight of what had happened hours before. The atmosphere in the apartment was different from anything they had ever felt together. There was relief, but also a strange feeling that something bigger was in the air, as if this unexpected visit had left not only traces of sadness, but also the need for both of them to reflect on what they really wanted for themselves. Jonathan, emotionally exhausted, leaned his head against the back of the sofa and closed his eyes, while Sophie watched him in silence, not sure if he needed a hug or just space to sort out the avalanche of feelings that had been building up since the betrayal. The stillness of the moment was so thick that any words would seem out of place, but Sophie decided to break it gently anyway, murmuring in a low voice that she did not intend to replace anything or anyone, but that she also would not wait indefinitely for someone who might not be ready to start over. Jonathan looked up, surprised by her frankness, but at the same time admired the courage he had always known Sophie had. He took a deep breath before answering, admitting that he still felt a confusion inside him that he could not put into words, because although he knew that the love he had for Emma was dead, the scars left by the betrayal would not heal so quickly, and he was afraid of starting something with Sophie carrying open wounds that could bleed over a relationship that, more than any other, deserved to be born pure. Sophie listened in silence, but her gaze revealed understanding, and that made her even more special in Jonathan's eyes, because unlike everything he had experienced, she did not demand, did not pressure, she only offered her presence as support and her heart as shelter. The moral dilemma that arose there, however, was as clear as the sky that was beginning to open after the storm. Would he allow himself to love someone who had always been close by, or would he close himself off, fearing repeating the pain he had just overcome? The following days were marked by a mix of serenity and introspection. Jonathan dedicated himself to consolidating his new routine, taking care of the apartment as if planting seeds in fertile soil, hoping that every detail would reflect who he was becoming. Mornings began to have a new meaning, as he would wake up to sunlight flooding into his room, reminding him that, despite the pain, there was a future to be built. The afternoons, previously filled with anxious waiting, were now spent walking in parks, revisiting old hobbies and meeting up with friends who, little by little, were starting to occupy a place in his life again. Sophie's presence was constant, but in a light way. She would show up with hot coffee, invitations for simple outings or just messages asking how he was, and her every gesture was like a breath of fresh air that dispelled the shadows left by Emma. During one of these encounters, while they were walking through an antiques market, Sophie stopped in front of a bookshelf full of old books and commented on how each object there carried stories of love, loss, and new beginnings. Jonathan, touched by her sensitivity, confessed that he was afraid of placing his hopes in someone again and ending up reliving the same pain, afraid that the cycle of frustrated expectations would repeat itself, afraid of losing himself once again by loving too much. Sophie smiled tenderly and held his hand, explaining that love is always risky, but that the real danger was in closing oneself off to the possibility of being happy, in getting used to loneliness just to avoid suffering. She encouraged him to look within and realize that the courage he had to put an end to something that was destroying him was the same courage that could guide him to something much more beautiful and true. In the midst of these moments of emotional intimacy, Sophie also opened up more than she had ever done before. She talked about relationships that had left a mark on her, about the times she trusted someone who didn't deserve it, about how she had learned to rebuild herself on her own before allowing herself to love again. Jonathan listened to her attentively, discovering nuances of her that he had never known before and realizing that they both carried scars that, instead of separating them, could unite them. The complicity that grew between them was almost palpable, but at the same time as delicate as porcelain, because any misstep could destroy what they were building with such care. There was a silent understanding that they didn't need to rush anything, that every smile, every conversation, every shared silence was, in itself, an important step towards healing everything that had been broken. The moral dilemma, however, intensified as their bond deepened. Jonathan found himself torn between a genuine desire to surrender to this new feeling that was blossoming and the fear that he was simply using Sophie as a crutch to overcome his loneliness. As much as he wanted to believe in the purity of everything they were experiencing, he could not shake off the inner voice that warned him about the possibility of confusing gratitude with love. Sophie, on the other hand, also felt fear of being just the second option, the woman who appeared at the right time, but who would be left as soon as his pain subsided and new possibilities arose. This duality hung over them like a cloud, but, paradoxically, it also fueled deep conversations that made them question their own most intimate truths and fears. On a quiet evening, after a simple dinner on the balcony of Jonathan's apartment, they both sat watching the city lights, lost in thought. He broke the silence, confessing that he had never felt so much transparency in a relationship, that the freedom to expose vulnerabilities was something he had never experienced, but that he also felt pressured by his own conscience to be sure of his feelings so as not to hurt her. Sophie took a deep breath and, with a choked voice, explained that she understood every word and that, more than any hasty declaration of love, she preferred honesty, because she could not bear to be loved just for being the person who showed up when everything was falling apart. Jonathan held her face gently, looking deeply into her eyes, and promised that he would not make any decisions based on neediness or fear, but that if he ever told her he loved her, it would be because he truly felt it in every beat of his heart. Their encounters became more meaningful, even though there were still no clear definitions about what they were building. They went for walks, to watch movies, to discover new places they could call their own, but always respecting each other's pace. At each farewell, there was a long hug that said more than words could express, and at each reunion, a smile that lit up both of them, showing that, despite the past, life offered new opportunities to love in a more mature, conscious and true way. Doubts still existed, but they were no longer paralyzing. On the contrary, they served as a sign that they were willing to do things differently, to build something solid on the basis of sincerity and mutual respect. One day, while visiting a modern art exhibition, they stopped in front of an installation that depicted two human figures separated by a translucent, almost transparent wall, but which prevented them from touching. Sophie, moved, commented on how many people live like this, close enough to see each other, but too far away to truly feel each other, and how she feared that this would happen to them. Jonathan pulled her close, wrapping her in a hug that conveyed more than any explanation could, and said that he was willing to tear down any wall that might exist between them, as long as it was built with patience and care, because he did not want to repeat the mistakes of the past, but rather learn from them. At that moment, they both realized they were at a point of no return. They knew they would have to make decisions that would change their lives irreversibly, that they could not remain indefinitely in the comfort zone of friendship that warmed them but also limited what they could experience. From then on, each choice they made would define whether they would continue together, on a path full of uncertainty, or whether they would prefer to distance themselves to preserve the memory of a reunion that was, in itself, transformative. Jonathan's heart was beating fast, because even without confessing it out loud, he already knew that Sophie had become indispensable in his life, that she was the missing piece for him to feel whole again, but he needed to be sure that this was real and not just a reflection of the fear of being alone. As they walked back home, the night wind ruffling her hair and the moon illuminating the soft contours of her face, Jonathan wondered if it would be possible to start over without carrying the chains of the past, if he could allow himself to love without distrusting every gesture, every word. Sophie, in turn, held his hand firmly, as if she wanted to show that she was willing to fight, but also to let go if she realized that it was not the right time. The silence between them was comfortable, but full of expectations, because they both knew that the next conversation would define not only what they would be from then on, but also whether the pain they each carried would be used as a foundation or a barrier to what they could live together. That night, when they arrived at Jonathan's apartment door, the weight of what they had talked about during the walk still hung in the air, almost palpable. Sophie hesitated before saying goodbye, her gaze reflecting a mixture of hope and fear, because even though she knew that the feeling between them grew with each meeting, she also understood that there was no longer room for illusions. They needed to decide whether to keep trying or whether each of them would go their separate ways. Jonathan, for his part, felt his chest tighten at the prospect of losing her, but he also knew that he could not drag her into an uncertain relationship just out of fear of loneliness. When their eyes met under the soft light of the hallway, everything seemed as fragile as it was necessary, and it was Sophie who broke the silence with a low voice, almost a whisper, saying that she could not bear to be the patch of a broken heart, that she deserved someone whole, someone ready to love her without reservations. He nodded silently, absorbing every word, for he recognized in that sentence her self-love, the same that he himself was fighting to regain. They entered the apartment, where the aroma of coffee still hung in the air from their last afternoon together, and sat on the living room rug, close, but not so close that they could ignore the tension that was growing between them. Jonathan, his voice hoarse with emotion, explained that he needed time to understand if what he felt for her was love or just gratitude for the comforting presence she had offered in his darkest days. Sophie took a deep breath, her eyes welling up but not allowing the tears to fall, and replied that time was something she could offer, but not indefinitely, because she feared wasting herself waiting for someone who might never be ready. Their honesty made each word even more painful, because despite all their connection, there was the cruel possibility that life had other plans, and that the closeness that united them could be exactly what separated them. In the days that followed, they both decided that they needed some distance to sort out their feelings. Sophie returned to her routine, immersing herself in personal projects, meeting up with friends she hadn't seen in a long time, and spending her time with activities that had always done her good. Jonathan, on the other hand, began to dedicate himself to short trips, exploring nearby cities, meeting new people, and trying to rediscover the pleasure of being in his own company. In each landscape, in each casual conversation with strangers, he felt life pulse differently, as if he were finally freeing himself from the past that had trapped him in a narrative of pain. Still, in each sunset he watched alone, he remembered Sophie's eyes and wondered if he would ever be able to see that same sparkle in someone else. One night, while walking along the shores of a lake lit only by the full moon, Jonathan stopped to reflect on everything he had experienced. He remembered every detail of his relationship with Emma, from the first caresses to the last cold words, and he realized that, although he had been betrayed, he had also allowed the relationship to reach that point because he had ignored signs, because he had believed that love alone was enough to save something that was already doomed. This realization freed him from some of the resentment he had been carrying, because he understood that forgiving did not mean accepting what had happened, but rather refusing to allow pain to determine every step of his future. That insight made him realize that, perhaps, what he felt for Sophie was more than gratitude, that it had been born from genuine affection, but had matured into something that could, indeed, be called love, a different, more conscious love, built on the honesty that they now insisted on preserving. The next morning, he returned to the city determined to find Sophie, but when he arrived at her building, he hesitated in front of the door. His heart was beating wildly, because although he was determined to open up completely, he knew that she was not obliged to wait for him. When he finally gathered the courage to knock, he was greeted by a surprised Sophie, but with a restrained smile, as if she did not know what to expect from that visit. Jonathan then took her hand in his and, looking straight into her eyes, began to speak in a firm but emotional voice, explaining that on the trips he had taken, in the hours when he had been alone, he had understood that her presence in his life was not just a consolation, but a living reminder that love could be light, spontaneous and sincere, that by her side he felt whole again, and that if she still wanted it, she would like to try to build something real, in the right way, respecting the time and feelings of both. Sophie remained silent, feeling his words echo within her like a promise she didn't even dare hope for. Slowly, she cupped Jonathan's face with her hands and replied that she had never stopped believing in their possibility, but she needed to be sure that it wouldn't just be the answer to a fear. He nodded, swearing that from that moment on, he would do everything differently, that he wouldn't make her feel like an afterthought, because he saw in her not only a chance to love again, but the possibility of living with someone who truly understood the meaning of reciprocity. The hug that followed was different from any they had shared before. There was no more hesitation, just the comfortable warmth of two souls who, even though they were hurt, were willing to care for each other. Their relationship didn't turn into a fairy tale overnight. On the contrary, they went through weeks of frank conversations, moments of insecurity, discussions about what they both expected from a healthy relationship. Honesty became the main pillar, and at each meeting, they reaffirmed that they would not allow ghosts from the past to dictate the course of the present. Jonathan made an effort to demonstrate with concrete gestures that he was committed. He made a point of prioritizing time with her, of sharing thoughts and decisions, of building together the small routines that transform everyday life into something meaningful. Sophie, in turn, was patient but also assertive, making it clear that, although she trusted him, she would not give up on herself for fear of losing him. One weekend, they decided to travel to a remote cabin, surrounded by mountains and crystal-clear streams, where the silence of nature created the perfect setting for them to reconnect without distractions. The cold nights called for a lit fireplace, and in front of the dancing flames, they talked for hours about plans, dreams, fears, and scars. In one of these conversations, Sophie revealed that she still found herself questioning whether she could fully trust someone who had come from such a traumatic relationship, and Jonathan calmly explained that his greatest goal was to make her never doubt the place she occupied in his life. Between soft kisses and long hugs, they gradually built a new story, in which they both chose to be, not out of necessity, but out of genuine desire. In the midst of these moments of sharing, dilemmas arose that made them question how far they would go to protect what they were building. Jonathan found himself torn between keeping the past completely buried or facing it whenever it was necessary to reaffirm to himself the importance of the present. Sophie, in turn, understood that starting over did not mean erasing anyone's history, but learning to deal with what each person brought in their emotional baggage. They decided together that they would not let fear paralyze them, that they would rather face the uncertainties of the future side by side than live in the security of sterile solitude. This decision brought relief, but also a mutual commitment to never allow uncomfortable silences to settle between them again. The return to the city after the weekend at the cottage was symbolic. During the trip, they stopped on a deserted road to watch the sunrise, sitting on the hood of the car, hugging each other under a blanket. There, as the golden light bathed the horizon, Jonathan whispered that he loved Sophie, not with the desperate love of someone looking to fill in holes, but with the serenity of someone who understands that true love requires freedom, respect, and courage. Sophie, moved, replied that she loved not only who he was now, but also the story that shaped him, because she recognized in his vulnerability the strength of someone who chose to start over. The kiss that sealed that dawn was more than romantic. It was the silent promise that, regardless of what the future brought, they would be willing to fight for each other. When they returned home, their routine took on new forms. Jonathan began to invest in new professional projects, finding satisfaction in initiatives that allowed him to help other people who had also gone through painful breakups. Sophie, motivated by the experience they had together, began to study psychology, driven by the desire to understand human emotions more deeply and help those who needed to start over. This synergy between the two allowed them to grow individually and as a couple, turning each challenge into an opportunity to strengthen their bonds. In the midst of this, they continued to cultivate the small gestures that kept them connected, loving notes, improvised breakfasts, randomly chosen movie nights. The moral dilemma, although it still came up in nighttime conversations, was no longer an obstacle but a reminder that love is not about ignoring difficulties, but about facing them with courage and vulnerability. Jonathan and Sophie discovered that the greatest act of love they could offer each other was the daily commitment to choosing to stay, even when fears whispered that it would be easier to give up. And so, each dawn together became not just another day, but confirmation that sometimes life's greatest tragedies can become the starting point for stories that could never have been written if it weren't for the pain that, one day, almost made them give up on believing in love. Jonathan and Sophie's life moved at a new pace, marked by the routine they learned to build together, but also by small challenges that, overcome together, made their relationship increasingly solid. Mornings were filled with conversations that began with trivial matters but invariably evolved into deep reflections on who they were, what they wanted and how they could improve as individuals and as a couple. Sunday afternoons, previously synonymous with melancholy for Jonathan, became moments of joy and planning, when they sat down to imagine trips, study new projects or simply savor the comfortable silence that only exists between those who trust each other completely. Sophie, in turn, discovered in the love she built with Jonathan the strength to re-signify her own scars, because if before she was afraid of giving herself completely, now she understood that protecting herself from love only distanced her from what she had always sought, a true companion. But life, with its unpredictability, brought Emma an ending that no one could have foreseen. After her last conversation with Jonathan, she disappeared from the places she used to frequent, distanced herself from mutual friends and even moved to another city, in a desperate attempt to escape the weight of regret that consumed her daily. In her new address, she tried to rebuild her career and self-esteem, but found only loneliness as her constant companion. Her nights were marked by confusing dreams that mixed memories of happy moments with flashes of the betrayal that destroyed everything, and her mornings were hard, because each awakening was a cruel reminder that the life she had was destroyed by her own hands. The only message she managed to send Jonathan, months later, was a short confession that she had never found anyone who made her feel as safe as he did, and that she had understood, too late, that the betrayal was not just a mistake, but the sentence that condemned her to live in constant regret. Jonathan read that message with a heavy heart, but without anger. He no longer felt anything but compassion for Emma, because he understood that the greatest punishment someone could receive was to be aware of their own mistake without any chance of reparation. He chose not to respond, because he saw no point in reopening wounds that were finally healing, but he silently hoped that she would find peace, even if it was far from him. This decision freed him once and for all, because if before he felt that there were still invisible ties that tied him to the past, now he realized that those threads had been broken, allowing him to finally surrender to the present that he was building with Sophie. The relationship between Jonathan and Sophie evolved so naturally that, one winter night, while they were cooking together and having fun amid disastrous recipes and sincere laughter, they realized that they had already formed a family even without having planned it. The photo frames scattered around the apartment showed trips, achievements and simple moments that, together, told the story of two hearts that decided to rebuild together. And it was on that night that Jonathan, with his heart racing and his voice breaking, knelt before Sophie and asked her to share with him not only the good days, but every day of their lives. Sophie, with tears of joy streaming down her face, accepted without hesitation, because she knew that this request was not made to fill in holes, but to seal a story built on respect, truth and genuine love. In the months that followed, they decided to celebrate their union with an intimate ceremony, surrounded only by people who had closely followed their journeys of pain, overcoming and rebirth. The chosen place was a garden full of lavender and olive trees, symbolizing peace, healing and perseverance. When they exchanged vows, Jonathan promised to never again allow silences to become abysses, while Sophie swore to never fear being vulnerable, because she knew that there she had found someone who would not use her weaknesses as weapons. The words they exchanged moved everyone present, because it was not just a wedding, but a celebration of the courage of two emotional survivors who allowed themselves to believe again. Meanwhile, Emma continued her life marked by ups and downs, but always haunted by what she had lost. She tried other relationships, but each one ended faster than the last, because she carried within herself the distrust of the person who had betrayed her and, therefore, could not believe that anyone could be sincere. In her moments of solitude, she remembered in detail the last night she saw Jonathan, and each memory hurt her like a sharp blade, because she understood that her actions had destroyed not only the love she received, but the chance to build a future full of complicity. Over time, she began to dedicate herself to volunteer work in NGOs that support women in crisis, trying to transform her pain into something that could help other people not make the same mistakes. After their marriage, Jonathan and Sophie began to engage in community projects, helping couples strengthen communication and recognize the signs that a relationship needs care, creating spaces for dialogue in which vulnerabilities could be welcomed rather than hidden. For them, sharing their stories was not a painful exposure, but a constant reminder that wounds can become bridges to heal others. At each lecture and workshop, they saw attentive eyes and heard emotional stories from those who found, in their words, the strength to not give up trying or the courage to put an end to what was no longer working. Their daily lives also blossomed with the unexpected arrival of a child, who brought new meaning to everything they had experienced. In the first months of pregnancy, Sophie was afraid that her insecurities would return, but Jonathan showed, with every gesture, that she would never face anything alone. When the baby was born, they saw in him the purest representation of the love they had built, because they knew that if they had not decided to face their own ghosts, they would never have gotten this far. Each smile from the little one was confirmation that all the suffering was just the prologue to a bigger and more beautiful story. Jonathan learned, from every mistake in the past, that love needs to be nurtured daily, that there are no indestructible relationships without constant care, and that small everyday actions are much more powerful than any grand promises made in moments of euphoria. Sophie, in turn, understood that trust does not mean forgetting what one has experienced, but consciously choosing to believe that, together, they can overcome any challenge. Together, they became more than partners, they became accomplices in a journey that never allowed pain to be greater than hope. With that, each character found their destiny: Emma, trapped in a labyrinth of regret, seeking redemption through actions that would never erase the past; Jonathan and Sophie, embracing the gift of a love built on the courage to start over, showing that life can be generous to those who are willing to rebuild themselves with honesty. Thus, the story comes to an end, reminding us that betrayal does not only destroy a relationship, but can destroy dreams, projects and the trust that takes years to build, but only seconds to be ruined. May Jonathan and Sophie's courage inspire everyone not to give up on finding someone who makes them feel fully loved, and may Emma's pain serve as a warning to those who think that infidelity is just a mistake without consequences. Comment below what you thought of this story, we really want to hear your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more exciting stories like this one. And remember, cheating is not, never was and never will be justifiable. It destroys families, dreams and entire lives. Our channel does not support any type of cheating and believes that true love can only flourish where there is respect, dialogue and fidelity.